the reason why I brought these books is because they're kind of symbolic of the quest that Dr. Barry and I have been on. We've been in practice now for 17 years, and then almost 5 years before that studying, going to chiropractic school. And then we were interested in health and healing and the mind-body connection for, many years before that. But an interesting thing happened on the way to becoming a chiropractor. And when we went to chiropractic school, we actually had no idea that we were going to be doing what we're doing now, and we had no idea of the effects that our work would have on people. Because our personal experience of chiropractic, which we both had been going to chiropractors for many years, was the more traditional structural approach to chiropractic, which is what most people are familiar with. And it was helpful for various injuries that we had. However, when we serendipitously or synchronistically met our first kind of light touch chiropractor who did something very similar to what we do now, we began to have experiences that were totally different from what we had experienced at our previous chiropractic offices. And those experiences were much more multidimensional with our new chiropractor. So multidimensional meaning, yes, we felt a clear effect on our bodies, that our bodies were feeling more flexible, they were releasing tension patterns. If we had pain, that was getting better. Old injuries seemed to be healing. But in addition to that, we had effects that were emotional, where we felt an opening to positive energy, to positive emotion, kind of a lifting of heaviness, a clearing, a sense of being more present in our bodies, being more grounded, and many positive thoughts in terms of possibilities for the future started to open up for both of us. And we began to study at that point, which was actually, this chance meeting was our very first day on campus in chiropractic school. So it was kind of like we were directed right from the beginning, okay, this is what you're supposed to do. But of course you have to learn all of the standard chiropractic adjusting techniques, and you're tested on those, and you do those under supervision in clinic, and you have to be adequately good at that in order to get licensed as a chiropractor. So we did learn a wide variety of techniques, and we were able to structurally adjust people. And we could now if we had to, but we very, very, very rarely will actually do a structural manipulation on someone's spine, because we have found that the work that we are doing with this light touch, different quality of touch that is non-manipulative, it's communicative, but it's non-manipulative, is having effects that are just as profound as what we experienced, and even more so in terms of there being a wide variety among the people that we have been working with. So right from the very beginning of opening our own practice, people were starting to tell us things. Now, of course, most people think you go to a chiropractor if you have back pain or neck pain or headaches or something like that, sciatic pain, the classic musculoskeletal problems people associate with chiropractic. And so most people that came to us with those problems. But most people probably in the world, I forget which country is said to have the happiest people, but it's not the U.S. We're not at the top of the list. There's a lot of stress in this country. And so people were coming to us with back pain or whatever, but we all have these histories of all kinds of a variety of stressful experiences, ranging from, wow, I had a really good upbringing, I had a functional family, I lived in a safe town, I had positive relationships with my parents and my siblings, I did great in school, and now I love my job and my husband or wife. And, I have mild stress because of this or that. Okay, so that's at one end of the spectrum, and I haven't met too many people like that. I don't know if I've met any, maybe one. And then the other end of the spectrum is people who've experienced some degree of trauma in their lives. And there's intense trauma, extreme trauma, like war, being in a war situation, or being violently attacked, or being molested, or a variety of experiences that are unfortunately not even, fairly common in this country, both among men and women. And then we have, in the middle along this spectrum, a variety of levels of stress that people experience. And so people right from the beginning were coming in with these very complex histories and lives, and they would tell us these stories from their lives, and we weren't sure at first, does this relate to their back pain or not? I'm not sure, that this happened to them in childhood, or that happened to them in early adulthood. But what started to happen is that as people were under care, they started to tell us things like, I've decided, along with my psychiatrist, that I'm not going to take my medication I don't need my medication for depression anymore. There was one young woman fairly early on who told us that she had agoraphobia, which had developed after years of panic attacks, where she could practically no longer leave her house. She felt very, very anxious being in any kind of open situation or with other people. So, and after maybe 2 months of care, she said, she came in one day and she said, the other day, without even thinking about it, I went into this really crowded cafe. I was standing there in line and talking to all these people around me. And she said, it took like 10 minutes for me to realize, oh my God, look where I am. Look what I'm doing. That's a profound healing experience. So people were having healing experiences on mental, emotional, spiritual levels that were in addition to, luckily for us, since we are chiropractors, what we do really does work for back pain for most people, and headaches and neck pain and all of those musculoskeletal things. But in addition to that, because of the absolute unity of the mind and body, of consciousness and matter, and I bet you that this was the other quote that Dr. Barry was looking for before, and I happened to mark it. In the jargon of science, consciousness is regarded as an epiphenomenon of matter, or has been at least. Matter comes first, and then consciousness. In this conviction, consciousness is something that arises out of the interaction of trillions of molecules within your body. However, newer science, and certainly quantum physics would fall into this category, has taken us by the shoulders, turned us around, and pointed us resolutely in the direction opposite to this hypothesis. We now realize that consciousness underlies and organizes matter and not the other way around. We have discovered that changes in consciousness precipitate changes in matter. We have realized that it is consciousness that is primary and matter that is secondary. So what people were experiencing is they were experiencing a shift in consciousness. They were experiencing a shift in consciousness during the session, and then little by little and more over time, they were experiencing a shift in consciousness that did begin to permeate their greater life and world more and more. And with that came an alteration in their physical bodies, in the level of muscle tension. So we began to ask ourselves, how is what we're doing creating that? We didn't understand it on an intellectual level. And it was very frustrating because for quite a number of years, we simply had to accept, we do this, we do this, we do this, and all that happens. How could this be? So probably about 10 years ago, there began to become more and more information available on stress, more than 10 years, maybe 20 years, but in the last 10 years, more of a focus on the mind-body connection, trauma and post-traumatic stress disorder, and various levels of stress and how it affects the body and how we can heal from these things. And one of the leaders in the field is Peter Levine, who, this is actually his latest book, In an Unspoken Voice, How the Body Releases Trauma and Restores Goodness. And what Peter Levine, who is a psychologist, he was one of the, early on, one of the people 25, maybe 30 years ago, was learning about the relaxation response and how to take people through a process where they would go into a deep state of relaxation, and this would help with anxiety and depression and a variety of conditions. And a woman was referred to him from a psychiatrist who was a colleague of his who had panic attacks, chronic panic attacks that were getting worse for 20 years. And she also was on the verge of becoming agoraphobic, where she was having difficulty leaving her home. So the psychiatrist referred her to Peter Levine, thinking maybe if she learned to relax her body, this would help. So she comes into the session with Dr. Levine, and he takes her through this guided, relaxation, and she goes into a deep state of relaxation, and then all of a sudden she has a full-blown panic attack because a memory comes up of when she was 4 years old and she had a tonsillectomy, and doctors and nurses were all holding her down as she was trying to get away as they anesthetized her to have this surgery. And this was a severely traumatizing experience for her, which she was never able to process with anybody. Nobody ever understood the significance of what had happened to her. And so she had this effect which had affected her entire adult life. So here she is, her heart pounding out of her chest. She's having a full-blown panic attack, and it's the complete opposite of what he is expecting, her to experience. He has no idea what to do. And out of nowhere, from his own intuitive wisdom, his own intuitive self, he sees a flash of an image of a tiger leaping at her. So he says to her, without thinking about it, "There's a tiger! There's a tiger coming at you! Run, run, run fast! There's a big rock over there! Run and climb the rock and get away!" So she's reclining on kind of like this couch, and her body starts to kind of shake, and her legs start to go like she's running. And her legs are going, and in her mind she's running, and she's running from the tiger. She climbs up the rock, and he says, "Get on top of the rock, and now you're safe. Can you see you're safe? The tiger can't get you. Put your arms up in victory and feel, that you've done it, you've gotten away." So she's still, so the sweat's pouring and her heart's pounding, but she's like, "Okay, I'm safe, I'm safe, I did it." And her body then starts to shake. Her whole body is shivering and shaking, and this goes on for about an hour. And it finally starts to subside, and after the shaking stops, she says that she feels like she's enveloped in this sense of warmth and like a tingling energy going through her body. And then she gets this sense of a deep peacefulness and safety, and that her heart is opening, and she feels very present, and her body just feels full of like an energy. And from that point on, she had no more panic attacks. And in fact, she seemed to become another person. Her whole life just turned around. So he then was faced with this like, oh my God, what has happened here? And he started to do research on what is this shaking and what's going on, and how did she get to change? How did that change her so much? And he was one of the first people to discover and talk about how animals, mammals in particular, have a way of discharging stress and trauma through the body, through that what happens when we are traumatized. And one of the interesting things about trauma is we normally think of trauma as being something very extreme. And so I mentioned war and violence and things like that. But this is another recent book that he wrote called Healing Trauma, where he actually describes things that you can do to bring this healing for yourself through your body in healing trauma. But he talks about, besides the extreme sources of trauma, less obvious potential causes of trauma, minor automobile accidents, including fender benders that might have given you whiplash, invasive medical or dental procedures, especially if it requires any type of anesthetic. Falls and other so-called minor injuries, especially if in childhood or with the elderly. Natural disasters, illnesses with a high fever, prolonged immobilization, especially in children having a cast, a splint, or those shoes that made your feet turn if they thought your hips were going the wrong way. Exposure to extreme heat or cold, especially in children and babies. Sudden loud noises, especially in children and babies. Birth stress for both mother and infant. And I would include on this list being overly criticized, humiliated, bullied, ignored, or misunderstood in childhood or at any point in your life. Shamed. Abuse by siblings. Shame from poor school performance. Failure or severe embarrassment. Exposure to parents, unexpressed emotions, or unrealized dreams. Do you know that as children, we can feel what our parents are feeling that they do not express? And this affects us very profoundly. So if a parent is depressed, if a parent is anxious, if a parent is angry, and a lot of parents do their best to try to hide these things from their children because they think, that it will harm them, and it probably would, but it's not a lot better, if any better at all, to have it unexpressed because the vibration of it is still there. The vibe is still there. When a person walks into the room who is moderately to severely depressed, whether or not they have a smile on their face, you can feel it. There's a vibe that comes with that. And so for children particularly, they're very sensitive. And so all of us have various levels of trauma. And one of the interesting things that Levine talked about, and I started to talk about animals and mammals and how they use shaking and movement of their body to release stress. And I'll tell you one quick, and he tells a story that illustrates this, of how, you've probably seen like in one of these channels where they show the animals in Africa and so forth, like a lion chasing a gazelle. And what happens is when the gazelle is running away, the sympathetic nervous system that gives you the fight or flight response, just trying to save your life, and that is on full blast in that gazelle. And they have a similar nervous system on that level to we do as what we have as humans. So the heart's pounding and the muscles are running, and it's running as fast as it possibly can for its life. But if it's being overtaken by the lion, in the second before the lion actually pounces, the gazelle knows that the gig is up and he can't get away. So what happens in the moment as the lion's coming toward it is that the gazelle just falls to the ground and goes limp. And it's not that it's playing dead, it's that a portion of the nervous system has kicked in which immobilizes it and creates a dissociation so that the gazelle cannot consciously feel what is about to happen to it. It will not feel the pain because it will not be present in its body. It's alive, but it's not present. So what happens is it falls to the ground as if it's dead, it's limp. Now, if for some reason, by some miracle, the lion does not actually kill it, maybe some other animal comes along and distracts it or starts to fight with the lion or whatever. Let's say the gazelle does not die, but now it's laying on the ground and it's limp, and it has been immobilized by a certain portion of the nervous system. If it's going to be able to recover and become a normal gazelle again without post-traumatic stress disorder, what's going to have to happen is as it's laying there on the ground, its body will start to shake and vibrate. It will literally shake and tremble for a period of time, and then as it has finished discharging, because what happened is, remember when it was running, there was this tremendous surge of energy that was going through its body. What happened to that energy when it, in a second, split second, it becomes limp and falls to the ground? That energy has to be stopped. It has to be stored. It has to be blocked from expression in that moment. So then the gazelle has this tremendous amount of potential energy that's stuck in its muscles, that's stuck in its nervous system, stuck in its body. And in order to discharge that, the most effective way in that moment is for it to start to move and shake and tremble and let its muscles contract in a rhythmic fashion. So it does that for a little while, and then it gets up and it trots away and it goes on with its life. And it is not traumatized. If it's prevented from doing that, then it will be traumatized. And there, Dr. Levine has spoken to kind of gamekeepers on preserves in Africa that have had to move animals from one area to another. And so they'll chase them down with a helicopter or a truck or something, and then have to, shoot a dart to anesthetize them, put them into a truck and take them somewhere and then let them wake up. And he said he notices that every time when they start to wake up, that they'll lay there and they'll shake and they'll quake, and then they'll get up and they'll walk away and they'll be okay. He said, but if for some reason there's a person too close by, or there's loud noises, or this natural process of the dissipation of the energy is disrupted, he said inevitably the animal will not survive. It will not be able to go back to living its normal life with its normal instincts. So my understanding as I'm reading these books and I'm living my own life and I'm hearing stories from other people is that so many of us are living somewhere on that continuum, that we have various levels of blocked energy in our bodies from experiences that we have had, life experiences that did not get to complete their cycle of discharge. So he defines trauma. He says that trauma represents a profound compression of survival energy, which has not been able to complete its meaningful course of action. So, how do you get this out? Because for many, many people, this compressed survival energy takes the form of really tight muscles in various places. And most people, when they come in and I do an exam on them, guess what they have? Really tight muscles in a variety of areas on their body. In addition to that is stiffness in the spine and altered posture and altered breathing patterns. All of this is related to this compressed energy in my perspective at this time. And so another expert in the field is Dr. David Berceli, and this is called the revolutionary trauma release process. And under having the same understanding as Dr. Levine, he's actually created a process where through fatiguing certain muscles, you allow the body to go into a process of literally kind of shaking. And that acts as a discharge. And he's worked with people who in war zones all over the world using this process. So I've had an experience of this, and it's very interesting. There's not just one way to do it, though. Okay, so occasionally when people are being adjusted here, their muscles might kind of twitch and jump, or their body might have an urge to kind of wiggle or move or shake. And we do encourage people, when you're on the table, if your body feels like moving, let it move. If you're on the table and you don't know why, but somewhere inside of you it feels like it would feel good just to do that with your shoulders. Or put your feet up and down, or move your ankles, or just stretch. Stretch your shoulders, stretch your arms, let your body move. So this is one way that the body can discharge, is through literally stretching and moving your body. But they also talk about how it doesn't have to just be this shaking of the body. This energy can be transformed into heat. It can be, there are many kinds of energy, right? So potential energy can be transformed into kinetic energy, which is movement, into thermal energy, which is heat. Some people feel their body getting warm in different areas, or hot. Some people feel a sense of energy or tingling or movement or waves of energy going through their body, during the treatments at various points. And so what we have noticed is that although what we're doing on the outside in ways is different from the treatment approaches that these people are taking to stress and trauma, the effects are very similar. And in fact, on the other end, as you're coming out of the tunnel, the other end of the tunnel, one of the wonderful things, and I think it's going to be a future book of Dr. Levine's, is called, his working title is Trauma and Spirituality, that as trauma is healed within us, as we release layers of restrictive stress and patterning from our bodies, that we can open ourselves to levels of amazing positive energy as our hearts open, as our bodies relax. We can experience more peace. We can experience more presence within ourselves. And I believe that this is actually our natural state, which is why this woman felt, after she went through this shaking thing, she felt this warmth, and she felt waves of energy going through her. She felt peace. She felt joy. So that's not an artificial state. That's our natural state. And what we can do to help to reconnect with ourselves outside of the adjustment is to see our relationships with our own bodies, with ourselves, as being central to the healing process. So, what many people don't think about, and we're so trained to be critical of our bodies in our society, that it's supposed to look a certain way and smell a certain way and be a certain way. And but the truth of the matter is that our body is actually our very best friend. And that our body is what is allowing us to be here and have consciousness and have this life experience that we're having, that it's a gift, that something so sophisticated and complex is absolutely priceless. If someone were ever to be able to build something like this, nobody would ever have enough money to buy one. It's just so, the level of sophistication is there's no computer that compares at any level. And so if we can... complex organism in the universe. I can't remember who said that, but that sounds right. The most complex organism in the universe. And we each have one. We got it for free at birth. So here it is. And, many times we don't have awareness of our body except if it hurts. And so what we can start to do to help ourselves and to heal more and more outside of the office is to try to identify how connecting with different areas of our body might actually bring us a feeling of groundedness, a feeling of peace. Dr. Barry and I went to an intense movie about a week ago that was really got your adrenaline going. It wasn't violent, but it was intense emotionally. So I could feel my heart pounding and, the stress hormones going through my bloodstream. And so throughout the whole movie, I kept saying to myself, okay, what part of my body can I connect with so that I can feel peace in this moment? And for me, it kept being my hands and my feet. But for other people, it may be a totally different part. So what I found was every time I closed my eyes and completely brought my attention to my hands and my feet, I felt a shift in my consciousness. I felt a shift in my awareness and my relationship with myself. And I was able to watch this movie with more self-possession and without having to feel this sense of continuous anxiety through the whole thing. So this is what, and so many of you asked wonderful questions, and I'm not going to be able to answer them all directly in this talk, but the question of, what can I do outside of the office? I would say that one of the most important skills that we can cultivate as human beings is, if you have a meditation practice, or if you don't, spend a few minutes every day, even 3 to 5 minutes, just sit down and see if you can bring your awareness into your body to help you develop what's called a felt sense. A felt sense is kind of the summation of all of the sensory input that you can perceive throughout your entire body. So there might be a variety of different kinds of sensory input. And one of the interesting things about sensory input from the body is the brain stem, which is right where the brain connects with the spinal cord, is probably, something like about that big, right? And the back half of it is where all of the nerves that are bringing sensory information from the body come up to the brain, the back half of the brainstem, and through the front half, nerves are coming down to help control the body, so from the brain out to the body. And if a person was to have a stroke that created serious damage in the back side of the brainstem, so that it interrupted the flow of sensory feedback and information from the body to the brain, that person would lose some degree of their sense of self. Not just in a physical way. This is the integration of consciousness. And if it was severe, they would have almost no sense of self. Okay, so the more you pay attention to you encourage and you bring to conscious awareness sensory feedback from your body, the stronger your sense of self becomes. The more you can feel yourself, the clearer your boundaries are in your own life, the easier it is to sense, what do I need, what do I want, and how do I take care of myself best? So this is part of what's happening naturally during the treatment as a result of the quality of touch that we are using. So the touch that we are using is not, as I said in the beginning, it's not a mechanical touch, it's not a manipulative touch, it's a communicative touch. So we're communicating through our hands the emotions and the information that you are safe. In order for the body to let go, we have to perceive a sense of safety. And so we're not making anything happen in your body. We're not actually doing anything to you. What we're doing is using our hands in order to create a milieu, to create an internal environment in which your body will naturally release stress patterns, release trauma patterns, release tension patterns. And as it releases those patterns and the consciousness shifts in order to allow that to happen, we will start to return more and more to a connection with our most authentic self, with who we really are, with who we want to be. And this is what we see, this is what we've been so amazed at over the years. And to be honest with you, this is what makes, for Dr. Barry and I, what makes the work so rich.